The probe into the operator of the ill-fated ferry Sewol continues, and it turns out it's had a bad record, logging the highest number of accidents over the past 5 years. South Korea's foreign minister says a military conflict in Northeast Asia is a possibility, comparing the region to Europe in the 19th century. Showing signs of weakness, Korea's major companies' first quarter earnings missed market expectations in the first quarter. Hello and welcome, and a good evening for those of you in Korea. I am Kang Tae-ri in Seoul. 3 weeks have passed since the Sewol-ho ferry capsized off the southwestern coast of Korea. For more, we have Kim Ji-yeon at the news center for the latest. While the search for the missing continues, Ji-yeon, the investigations as to why and how the ferry sank are proceeding, and it turns out the operator of the ferry had a bad record, right?
That's right, Sherry. The prosecutors arrested 19 people related to the ferry sinking, including 15 crew members and 4 officials from the Cheonghae Marine Company. The investigation up until now was on the employees of the ferry operator and officials for overloading cargo onto the ferry that have eventually led it to capsize. The Cheonghae Marine Company was found to have the highest number of accidents among ferry operators in Korea for the past 5 years. And according to data by the Korea Coast Guard, the ferry operator had 6 accidents from 2009 to up to 2013. Which makes up around 10% of all ferry accidents here in Korea. Now, the investigation is expected to expand to other areas, including inspectors over the device and process of binding the cargo on board, those in charge of maintenance of the faulty lifeboats on the ferry, and the restructuring of the ferry itself.
So I take that authorities are proceeding with their investigations, assuming that the ferry operator had knowledge that there were potential problems with the vessel.
Yeah, that may be the case, Cherry. The prosecutors found that the ferry operator tried to sell the Sewol-ho ferry online in March at a price around $16 million US. At least one buyer from the Philippines wished to buy the ferry, and during the sale, the ferry operator did not reveal to its broker that it may be unstable and could quickly recover its balance since it was renovated, so that more space would be available for cargo and passengers. Prosecutors are trying to prove that the ferry operator knew of the false beforehand and wanted to sell it off.
And I wonder how the ferry operator's actions could go undetected for such a long time.
Well, Cherry, the prosecutors think that there was some wrongdoing in relation to the safety inspection of ferry operators, and that some were bribed in exchange for lax inspection. An official of the Korea Shipping Association, which oversees the shipping industry, was arrested today over suspicions of taking bribes from the ferry operators like the Cheonghae Marine Company in exchange for overlooking insurance fraud. The nonprofit organization is in charge of inspecting and certifying vessels on behalf of the government.
Now, Ji-yeon, we all know that the search operations themselves are very dangerous for all of them who are involved, actually highlighted by the death of an experienced diver yesterday. What's being done to ensure their safety?
Well, more medical staff have been deployed at the accident site, and up until now, there was only one emergency technician on the boat that served as a station for the divers before they went into the water. Now, additional medical staff were some 900 meters away from the ferry site, but there was criticism that transporting an injured diver to that location would be quite a waste of precious time. So the change comes after that civilian died while searching for the bodies that remain unaccounted for. Cherry, I'll be back with more updates in later newscasts.
Thank you very much, Kim Ji-yeon, at the top of the story. And the public anger and outrage over the Sewol-ho ferry disaster are prompting the government to act swiftly and fill in gaps in safety regulations. The government has announced plans to introduce an inspector within the Maritime Ministry to oversee not only the safety management of vessels, but also the areas in which they operate during during a cabinet meeting Wednesday. Officials also discussed shifting the current maritime safety system that focuses on emergency response to one that focuses more on preventing accidents. Under the changes, a presidential decree would determine who is subject to safety inspections and when a vessel operator is required to submit its safety records. The measures are meant to address a criticism that mismanagement and lax oversight led to last month's ferry accident. The New York State Senate has passed a bill that requires the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and the Japanese name Sea of Japan to refer to the body of water that separates the two countries. At a general session on Tuesday, the State Senate passed the bill in an overwhelming 59-1 vote. The bill requires the dual usage of both names in all school textbooks from July 2016. The bill has to pass the lower house to become the law. A similar bill was approved in the state of Virginia back in March. Spurred by their success, Korean American civic groups plan to push for similar legislation in states with high Korean American populations like California and New Jersey. Seoul's foreign minister says he wouldn't rule out the possibility of a military collision in Northeast Asia. The comments come as Japan strengthened its military ties with NATO through a new partnership deal during Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's trip to Brussels. UDN reports.
South Korea's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se says a military conflict could be on the cards in Northeast Asia, a region plagued by historical, regional, and security-related tensions. Speaking at the International Peace Institute in New York City on Tuesday, Yoon expressed his grave concern over the increasing rivalry in Northeast Asia. He noted China's emerging power, Japan's aim to make a comeback as a regional power, and Russia taking a tougher stance against the West. Minister Yoon said this, coupled with North Korea's ongoing nuclear threats, is creating serious changes to the geopolitical sphere of Northeast Asia, as well as to the Korean peninsula. The foreign minister's words of warning come as Japan tries to secure more military power. On Tuesday, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe signed a new partnership agreement with NATO that will deepen Tokyo's cooperation with the Western military alliance in areas including counter-piracy and humanitarian assistance. Speaking to ambassadors from the 28 NATO nations in Brussels, Abe also called for increased military freedom in Northeast Asia. Expressing concern over China's heavy military spending, the Japanese leader reiterated his wish to exercise the right to defend an ally under armed attack. Under the current interpretation of the constitution imposed after the Second World War, Japan is unable to settle international disputes using military force, even if it comes under attack. Abe said a panel of security experts is currently looking into changing this, with the government expected to come up with a policy on global peacekeeping operations. UDN, ARIRANG News.
A U.S. lawmaker says if war to break out on the Korean peninsula, Washington would deploy 20 Marine brigades to help defend South Korea. This, according to Howard McKeon, the chairman of the U.S. House Armed Service Committee. When asked Tuesday about war plans on the Korean peninsula during a debate on next year's National Defense Authorization Act, McKeon said 20 brigades would be mobilized. But some say federal budget cuts could make those plans unrealistic. The number of brigades in the Marine Corps is expected to drop to 21 once the cuts are complete, which would leave just one brigade in reserve. China's senior official, who is believed to be a messenger between North Korea and the U.S., went to Washington to meet with U.S. State Secretary John Kerry. North Korea and its nuclear program topped the agenda. Kim Hyun-bin has more.
The director of the International Department of China's Central Committee of the Communist Party held talks with U.S. Secretary John Kerry at the Department of State on Tuesday, local time. Wang Jieru, considered a messenger between China and North Korea, is believed to have discussed issues related to the Korean peninsula with Kerry, namely the North Korean nuclear threat and a possible resumption of the six-party talks. U.S. diplomatic sources note that Wang's visit to Washington is rare, and added that he is scheduled to meet with key U.S. diplomatic figures during his stay. It represents the latest development in a bid to curb North Korea's nuclear development. Last month, China's representative to the six-party denuclearization talks, Wu Da-wei, met with his U.S. counterpart Glenn Davies in Washington and New York, although they failed to come up with a concrete plan to advance talks. The sense of urgency is spurred by increased activity at the North Korea's Punggye-ri nuclear test site. Recent satellite images show that North Korea has sealed a nuclear tunnel shaft there, suggesting it could conduct the fourth nuclear test at any given time. Most experts agree that Pyongyang is capable of carrying out a test in the near future, but South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff is trying to downplay the speculation. It says Pyongyang has opened and sealed the tunnel numerous times before, and that the move doesn't necessarily mean a test is imminent, but added that it is keeping a close watch on the situation regardless. North Korea has conducted 3 previous nuclear tests, most recently in February of last year. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
The human rights violations perpetrated by the North Korean regime are well documented by now. To help the North clean up its act, the UN Human Rights Council has adopted a report with 268 recommendations, but it didn't take long for Pyongyang to flatly reject a good portion of them. Park Ji-won reports.
The United Nations Human Rights Council has provided North Korea with 268 recommendations to improve its dire human rights conditions. They came in a report adopted on Tuesday in Geneva during the Council's Universal Periodic Review session on North Korea. The extensive report urges Pyongyang to close its notorious prison camps and end public executions. It also called on the North Korean regime to stop its systematic and widespread human rights violations, which include forced labor. North Korea immediately dismissed substantial portions of the report, rejecting 83 of the recommendations outright. The rejected recommendations include closing down any political prison camps, eradicating state-sponsored discrimination based on the political backgrounds of families, and cooperating with the International Criminal Court. North Korea's UN ambassador Seo Se-pyong said the recommendations came out of the international community's misunderstanding and prejudices against the regime. Regarding the remaining 185 recommendations, North Korea said it will review them and respond before the Council's regular session scheduled for September, during which time the full report will be made public. The Council's Universal Periodic Review is held for 2-week periods, 3 times a year. During each session, 14 countries undergo reviews. Pyongyang took the opportunity to lash out at the United States. The North State media said the U.S. is the worst country in terms of human rights infringement. It called the United States a living hell, full of rampant racial discrimination and gun accidents, where only a select few get to enjoy material success. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
UN Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to The Korean won soared to its highest level in nearly 6 years on Wednesday on strong exports and the weakening U.S. dollar. The Korean won finished the trading day at more than 1,022 won, up nearly 8 won from last Friday. The gain comes as the U.S. dollar depreciated against major currencies on weaker than expected economic growth in the first quarter. Analysts also attribute the won's recent appreciation to Korea's prolonged current account surplus. Global investment banks expect the won to remain strong against the dollar for now, as Seoul currently allows for the won's appreciation. There is a speculation, however, that authorities may intervene to prevent the won from breaching that 1,021 level. Korea's biggest companies reported weaker than expected earnings and weaker than the year ago. Earlier, also denting corporate tax collection. That downward trend, however, is expected to turn around this year, but that doesn't necessarily mean analysts are expecting a strong domestic recovery ahead. Hwang Ji-hye tells us more.
Some new figures are casting a cloud over the prospects of Korea's moderate pace of economic recovery. According to data compiled by market researcher FN Guide on Wednesday, the pre-tax profits of 87 affiliates under the nation's 10 major conglomerates dropped almost 15% last year, from 2012 to around $50 billion. When taking Samsung Electronics, one of the nation's most profitable companies, out of the equation, the drop is even more pronounced at more than 30%. The sagging profitability of local companies also hit corporate tax collections. It dropped nearly 6% to $10 billion in 2013 from a year earlier. While citing the slowdown in emerging markets for the reason behind the disappointing performance of Korean companies last year, analysts do expect a 20% growth in corporate profitability for this year, helped by moderate recovery in advanced economies. They add, however, that the drop is largely due to the sluggish growth seen in the past 3 years.
Actually, we have not seen a significant signal for Korean exporters' earnings to turn around 2014. But I just want to point out the base effect first, because it's been lowered down too much.
Analysts still cite the slowing Chinese economy as a potential risk that could hurt the profitability of Korean companies this year. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
It's been 5 years since smartphone banking was first introduced to Korea, and Connie Kim reports on how the service evolved along with the evolution that we saw in smartphones.
25-year-old Chu Se-mi clicks through her smartphone banking application to find the right installment savings plan for her income. She says the process is simple and fast and only requires her to input some personal information.
Since I work, it's hard to go to the bank, but through banking applications, I can instantly get one-on-one counseling, which is so much more convenient and safe.
Smartphone banking has evolved over the years. What started as a way to make simple transactions from one account to another now includes other services like enabling users to secure loans and chat with a bank representative and purchase a financial product. The explosive growth of smartphone banking has South Korean banks rolling out a second generation of services, allowing users to do just about anything they can in an actual bank through mobile applications. Since being introduced to the market 4 years ago, the number of smartphone banking users in Korea has increased more than tenfold from about 2.6 million people in 2010. By June of this year, the Bank of Korea expects the figure to surpass 40 million, or nearly 4/5 of the total population.
The main bank transaction channels are switching from bank windows to smartphone channels, which now take up about 90%.
The rising number of smartphone banking users has also given rise to security concerns. To address them, banking institutions say they're constantly working to ensure that the information contained in these apps is just as secure as the money stored in the bank. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
The U.S. has announced that it's sending a team of experts to Nigeria to help rescue the more than 200 schoolgirls who were kidnapped last month. With more on that story and other global headlines, we now go to Paul E. standing by for us at the News Center. Paul, what kind of assistance are we looking at from the U.S.?
Well, according to the State Department, the American team will include military personnel, law enforcement officers, and hostage negotiators. They'll be based in the American Embassy in Abuja, working with Nigerian forces to help track down the hundreds of teenage girls. On Monday, a video surfaced featuring the leader of the Islamic extremist group Boko Haram, claiming responsibility for the mass abductions and saying that they plan to sell the girls into slavery. As of Tuesday, police and residents say 8 more girls were kidnapped in the northeast by Boko Haram gunmen. The Nigerian government earlier welcomed the offer of help from the U.S.
Mr. Kerry assured President Jonathan that the United States is wholly committed to giving Nigeria all required support and assistance to save the abducted girls and bring the reign of terror unleashed on parts of the country by Boko Haram to an end.
Meanwhile, protests have spread across the Nigerian capital, joining the scores of other rallies around the world calling for the swift return of the young students. Many are criticizing the government for responding too slowly and for not dealing with the Islamic militants sooner.
It's certainly a heartbreaking story, certainly for hoping for a breakthrough there. Now, tensions in Ukraine continue to mount amid clashes with the pro-Russian groups. Paul, has the government made any progress for a diplomatic solution?
Ukraine says it's not in favor of negotiating with the pro-Russian separatists, rejecting proposed amnesty for the rebels as the country slides further towards war. Ukrainian security forces, however, were able to retake the southeastern port city of Mariupol without further bloodshed. The pro-Russian militants had seized control of City Hall last week, but were purportedly left on Wednesday without any clear reasons. Ukraine's acting Interior Minister Arsen Avakov said more than 30 separatists were killed a day before in fighting around Slavyansk, which has become a stronghold for pro-Russian groups. Despite the ongoing fighting, many Ukrainians say they're still hopeful for peace.
Most Ukrainians worry that the country may go to a war, that we will really fight with Russia, and that our sovereignty will be assaulted. I am an optimist. I hope the Russians can give us a chance to hold the presidential election. We have the rights to hold the presidential election.
Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has ruled out new talks to defuse rising tensions in Ukraine. Lavrov also criticized Kiev for pushing forward with the presidential election scheduled for May 25th, despite the military being deployed against part of the population.
Now, turning to Central America, a top court in El Salvador has ordered the arrest and capture of a former president. Paul, what are the charges?
Well, former President Francisco Flores is facing a host of corruption charges, including embezzlement of government funds, illegal enrichment, and disobedience. Ex-President Flores, who ruled from 1999 to 2004, has been accused of misappropriating some more than $15 million donated by the Taiwanese government for earthquake relief efforts. Upon the court's ruling, El Salvador called on Interpol to help capture the former president, who is believed to be in Panama. Flores' defense lawyer has criticized the court's decision.
It's been a failure. This case goes on to the next stage with the measure of provisional detention, but there were no arguments heard. And there's an embargo. The embargo is on the properties, which are frozen as decided by the judges.
Flores has denied misusing the Taiwanese funds and argued that they were processed through official government channels.
And before I let you go, Paul, let's go to South Africa. The country has kicked off voting for its general elections. This is pretty significant for the country.
That's right, Chetty. South Africa is commemorating its 20th anniversary since the end of apartheid and white minority rule. These are also the first elections since the death of Nelson Mandela back in December, who was South Africa's first black president. Polls opened Wednesday morning as millions of South Africans are expected to vote in the so-called born-free election. Observers say voting began smoothly and many are eager to cast their ballots.
All I can say is that I first voted in 1994. Even now I am happy to vote because that's the freedom we have been fighting for.
According to opinion polls, the African National Congress, or ANC party, is widely expected to win in a landslide victory, returning President Jacob Zuma for a second 5-year term. Jetty?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. We'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. And it's time to get a check on the weather conditions with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, how are the conditions on Jindo?
Well, neap tides have returned near Chindo. This is why waves are down at 1.3 meters. However, winds are blowing fairly strong at 9.1 meters per second. Shifting our focus to our current conditions, clouds will gradually move in, leading to late-night sprinkles over the central regions. Total precipitation will be less than 10 millimeters, and that will fall through tomorrow morning, so please be sure to keep an umbrella handy. At the moment, dry weather advisories have been issued along most of the eastern coastline, and it looks like we may get another round of sprinkles on Sunday. Taking a look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul and Gwangju hit 21 degrees, while Daegu and Busan reached the mid-20s. Taking a look at other places, Daejeon and Jeju peak at 20 and 19 degrees, while Dokdo tops out at 14. Well, that's all the updates I have for you at this hour, but I'll be back with more after 10.
And I'm signing off here as well, and I will see you back here at 10 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.